Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing really well. It's great to have the opportunity to share with you again as we continue on in our new series on vision. Last Sunday, I told a story about rebuilding, which over the past weeks and months has prompted us to pray as Becky and I, as well as a staff team. Lord, if the disruption, the grief, the loss of this last year over the pandemic has caused a shaking within us, within our church family, the wider church and the wider spiritual landscape of the country, how should we be rebuilding in this time, for this time? Lord, what are you saying to us about the kinds of postures that we need to adopt as individuals or as a community for this season, in and for this season in the life of our church? Throughout the month, we'll be focusing in on some key biblical texts and highlighting what the rebuilding techniques that they have to offer us. Last week, we used Luke chapter 5, verses 1 to 11 as a jumping off point, reflecting mainly there on Jesus' invitation to go out where it is deeper and to let our nets down. But as we revisit the text again today, this morning, I want us to turn our attention to the end of this sentence and to the word that's used there by Luke for catch. Let me read the passage again for us before we get going. Luke chapter 5, verses 1 to 11. One day, as Jesus was preaching on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, great crowds pressed in on him to listen to the word of God. He noticed 2 empty boats at the water's edge, for the fishermen had left them and were washing their nets. Stepping into one of the boats, Jesus asked Simon, its owner, to push it out into the water. So he sat in the boat and taught the crowds from there. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Now go out where it is deeper and let your nets down to catch some fish." "Master," Simon replied, "we worked hard all last night and didn't catch a thing. But if you say so, I'll let the nets down again." And this time their nets were so full of fish, they began to tear. A shout for help brought their partners in the other boat, and soon both boats were filled with fish and on the verge of sinking. When Simon Peter realized what had happened, he fell to his knees before Jesus and said, "Oh Lord, please leave me. I'm too much of a sinner to be around you." For he was awestruck by the number of fish that they had caught, as were the others with him. His partners, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were also amazed. Jesus replied to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be fishing for people." And as soon as they landed, they left everything and followed Jesus. Here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to, because you're joining us on the stream today and we're in no rush, I want you to reach across to, the iPad or the computer, or whether you're watching, streaming onto your TV, and just press pause for a minute. And I want you to give yourself another few minutes to reflect on the text. Is there anything else standing out? Is there anything new that you're noticing? If you're watching alone, just take a minute, jot down some notes. And if there's somebody else beside you, why don't you ask them if they've noticed anything else? And we'll come back together in a couple of minutes. So press pause and then come back and join us in a moment. Great, well, welcome back. There's 2 things that I want us to reflect together on today. Hopefully you've already got your week 2 booklet so that you can take notes and follow along. If not, quickly jump to the vision button on the top left corner of the website, scroll down to week 2 and you'll be able to get your PDF document there. To start with, I want us to revisit verse 4. And I want to share with you some of the work that I've been doing on the fourth rebuilding technique that we can see emerging here. And then I want us to reflect on something of Simon's response in verse 5 and 6 too. So let's take another pass at verse 4 and see what strikes us there. Hopefully you've got it open in front of you if you don't have the booklet. Jesus says, "Go out where it is deeper and let your nets down to catch some fish." So similarly to last week, a deeper look at some of the language used here is really going to help us. And depending on what translation you've got in front of you or that we use most of the time, the word catch, it appears up to three times in Luke chapter 5, but each time the Greek that's used is different. And so I've had to do a bit of research as I've dug into this a little bit deeper. The word Simon uses in verse 5, for example, for when he's saying, "we didn't catch a thing," is the Greek word lambano, which means to receive or to grasp. You can imagine fishermen leaning over the side of the boat and then scooping fish into the boat. That's kind of the word it's designed to give us that kind of picture. Moving on then. The word that's used at the tail end of verse 10, when Jesus is telling Simon Peter that they're going to catch people or fish for people, depending on the translation, if you can jump there with me, that's a different word altogether. The Greek word zogreo, which means to take alive or restore to life. So there's quite a bit of progression there, isn't there? And to help us make sense of that, we need to look again at what Jesus says in verse 4, when he says to catch some fish. What the word Jesus uses here is a totally different type of word altogether. It's the Greek word agra. Okay, so agra can mean a number of different things. It can mean the physical work or act of catching. So there's some similarity and crossover with the word lambano. But what my work around this language and imagery has shown me is that agra paints a much bigger meaning as well. It is a wider word. To start with, it can refer to the catch as a whole, which certainly resonates with some of the restoration imagery that Jesus uses in verse 10. But where things really start to get interesting is when we learn how closely linked in some of the commentaries and dictionaries the word agra is to the imagery of following the chase. Now this is a really important piece to grasp a hold of, okay? Just like the way a fishing boat captain would track a huge shoal of fish. I've had some personal experience of this, fishing as a boy in the sea off Skerries as we followed and sat over shoals of mackerel. We couldn't pull the fish into the boat fast enough. Agra reminds us of the bigger picture of the great divine drama that is at play here. And one of the key questions forming in the background for us is asking what it means for us to be followers of the chase. This is an invitation for humanity to join with God's restoration of all things, the establishment of shalom, the renewal of creation, and the coming of the kingdom, as well as his passionate pursuit or chase of the ones he loves. Something really important for us to grasp a hold of here is the principle that God's whole business is renewal. And when we engage with it, something in us comes alive. When we engage in it, when we join God in what he's doing, we are truly following in his ways. This gives us insight into the very heart of God, which, as we think about this in terms of what it means to have vision or asking what our vision is, this is the very essence or DNA of the church, not just St. Catherine's Church, but of the church around the world. Agra is God's invitation to partner with him, to join in his mission, his chase, his pursuit here in the city that we love and are called to serve. And this is what makes Simon's response all the more powerful to me. There's such a key perspective shift here. Imagine all of the other different ways that he might have responded. I find what Simon says here so humble. If you say so, he says. Rima is the Greek word that's used here. It actually points us back to the language Jesus himself uses in the wilderness when he spoke about not living on bread, which we can make for ourselves, but instead living on every word that comes from the mouth of God. There is a connection here between both say and word. And of course, this is all happening in the wilderness too, where Jesus' identity was tested and shaken to its very limits, which again is something that resonates with all that we've been through over the past 15 months or more. Rima isn't just kind of saying yes to blind activity. Well, you say so, I'll go and do it then. It is a call into and an embracing of living a reliant life, into reliance. The bottom line being that if we are to align ourselves proactively with God's agenda of renewal in the world, if we are to join in his great chase, his deep work of renewal across our city, it means adopting the rebuilding technique of trust. Where empty and exhausted, we embrace a lifestyle that leads us beyond the worship of comfort and the avoidance of difficulty, tired and confused as we might be at times, fearful and uncertain about the future. Still, we choose to trust in the goodness of God, in all the good things God is doing, and in his perfect timing. This is another key principle from the text. As we surrender our wills, we become tools in his hands, agents of influence. Now, I don't know about you, but every time I read this passage, I'm blown away by the outcome. The outcome was far more than they could ever have possibly imagined. The picture we're given in verse 6, if you're happy to move on there, is of nets so full they start to tear. The word used here for tear, it means breakthrough. Rima is a reliance that leads to fullness. Polus is the Greek, which is translated as a great and varied abundance. And however counterintuitive it might seem, and despite all that we've been through since the beginning of the pandemic, and in light of everything I said last week about taking our time and listening to God and to one another, I still feel prompted to bring this word to us today. I fully believe this is God's word over us as a church. Abundance. I believe we are on the doorstep of a great and varied abundance. I believe we are on the doorstep of a quantum leap. There's all kinds of things the Lord has been saying to us prophetically over the years, particularly the last few. And if you're interested in reading more about them, you can go to the website and you can read and listen, and in some cases there's some videos to watch too. But there's one experience in particular from this year that I wanted to share with you today. A few months back, I was on a Zoom call with one of our Alpha teams, and we were preparing, or they were preparing, to lead the portion of the Alpha course they were serving on, which is all about the talks for the Holy Spirit and being filled with the Spirit. And Becky and I joined them in a team prayer time. It was a low-key prayer time. We prayed our prayers and ended the call, and as soon as we did, I was struck with this incredibly powerful memory, something I had completely forgotten about. The memory I had was of this old hotel brown chair that lived up against the outside wall of the hotel I worked in when I was a teenager. And during all of the summer weddings, just as the kind of second wave of guests starting to arrive for the afters, for the dancing, we would move everyone who was sitting at the table at a table on or near the dance floor. And a team would come out from the kitchen to clear off the cutlery and the linen. But it was my job, my friend and Alan and I, to collapse the tables, to roll them out of a door, which we would prop open with this old brown chair. And it's probably all kinds of layers to this memory and maybe what God was saying to me through it. But what I sensed God was saying to me, to us as a community through this picture, this memory, is that it speaks to something of the season that we're in. It speaks to something of what I believe God is about to do in us and through us as a church. There's a few parts to this. The first is that there's a second wave of guests are about to arrive. More people are coming to St. Catherine's. We don't know who they are, but the sense I get as I sit with this, even communicating it again today, is that the invitations have already been sent. God is on the move. And with that, we're facing a transition of sorts where things that have been laid out one way now need to be broken down and set aside, and that's going to involve some collaboration. It's something we do together, all hands on deck, as it were. And then finally, the purpose of it all, the purpose of the change and the disruption, is actually to make room for the party, to make room for the second wave of guests God is about to bring into our midst. Every time I sit with this picture, it reminds me of that portion of Luke chapter 15 where the Father throws this lavish homecoming party for the wayward child. This is yet another reminder of God's agra invitation to align ourselves with his plan to fill the world with his presence and to become his ambassadors in the world, joining God out where he is as he does all that he is doing. He's calling us to adopt the sacrificial, risk-taking, responsibility-embracing posture of renewal, to partner with him in his work of new creation and to center our lives around his mission in the world. The Agra call that we've been exploring together today is not just something to be affirmed. It is something to be lived and walked out. Nets need to be dropped. And with each fertile step of surrender out into the deep, we choose to contend for the things of God rather than simply live to consume. I'll be unpacking that idea a little bit more on the 20th as we close out the series. But for now, I want to ask you, I want to call you, I want to invite you to pray with Becky and I. Every day at noon this week, starting on Tuesday, right the way through to Saturday, during this week of prayer and fasting, we'll be gathering over Zoom for 15 minutes to pray for courage, for peace, for grace, for understanding and for clarity, and that God would do all he has planned to do in us, with us, and through us. We'll be gathered on Wednesday night if people are open to meeting in person to connect and pray. But I want us to pray now too. So if you can, just take a moment to settle yourself and to be still. I want you to take a moment to be still and open yourself up to God. And thinking about what we explored together last week together, to open yourself up to hearing from him. Open yourself up to connecting with his heart again. His pursuit of others. His great love. And to accept, if you're willing, his invitation to be a follower of the chase, to partner with him in all he's doing. He doesn't bully us. He asks and then waits. We have to open the door We have to echo those words of Simon Peter's. Despite the long, hard slog, to adopt the rebuilding technique of trust and to say, Lord, if that's what you want of me, I'll put my nets down again. I surrender my will. All that I have is yours. I want to be a tool in your hand, Lord. I want to be an agent of influence for your kingdom's sake. Fill me now with your Spirit and show me how to play my part.